Thank you for joining us on a new episode in the Gaia-X podcast series. I am Cristina Poguna, the program manager for the open source community, and today we are having a panel discussion with David Vallejo from Arcis, Oscar Lazaro from ByData, and Jose Baglaca from Tecnalia. Together, we are going to talk about breaking the silo and how to ensure data flows between ecosystems. I would start first by asking you to say a few words about yourself. So maybe we can start with Joseba.
Okay, I'm Jose Baglaca. I'm the digital director at Tecnalia. Tecnalia is a research center, private research center operating mainly in Spain, and fully committed to Gaia-X from the very beginning. I'm very excited to be here talking to you.
Thank you. Great to have you here as well. Oscar?
Hello, good morning. My name is Oscar Lazaro, Managing Director of Innovalia and General Secretariat of ByData. ByData is an Iberian association that is dealing with the development of data economy in the Iberian territory. And obviously, Gaia-X is one of the technologies and supporting infrastructures that we will build our ecosystem upon. And very happy to join everyone today here.
David?
Yes, hello. My name is David Vallejo. I'm a telecom engineer. I've been working on both sides of the internet for more than 20 years already. And on one hand, I was working at major telco in Switzerland that is providing access to the internet. And on the other hand, now at Arcis since 2007, hosting all these services, right? So I'm leading right now the project management office and the innovation areas. Arcis is a cloud service provider. We have been hosting internet services since last century, starting with email, web, and other basic services. And now we are currently running cloud nodes in data centers in Europe and America. And we are also part of the IONOS group headquartered in Germany.
Awesome. Thanks. So jumping into the topic, at Gaia-X, we discuss about data federation and exchanging data within such federation, but we also discuss about interoperability between them. So I would like to talk today with you about the why, what, and how of this interoperability. So first, let's touch on the why. Oscar, why do you think we need the ecosystems to be interoperable? What is the advantage to do it?
I think that is a tricky question, but let's see if we can bring some light into it. We should remember that data is actually something that will support the development of a new form of economy in the years to come. A new form of economy that will impact the way that we deal with territories, the way in which the competitiveness of and sustainability of industry will develop in the future, as well as on the quality of the services that we will provide to citizens across EU and globally at the stage. So data is something that will go beyond a single sector or a single area of activity. And if we really want data to drive this type of new forms of services, new form of competitiveness in industry, and new ways of ensuring the quality of life of European citizens, we need to think broader. We need to think in terms of different sectors collaborating together. Interoperability is actually key to facilitate that. Without interoperability, we will not be able to achieve any of those visions.
Okay, thank you for that. So, if I understand you right, it's touches on the complexities of the lives we live now, and where everything is interconnected. We also need to make sure that there's interoperability and interconnection in the future data ecosystems.
It's actually this hyperconnectivity that calls for interoperability.
Yeah. So I think there are multiple aspects we need to look at besides the technical ones, like the real business case and governance or legal frameworks. Joseba, would you be able to tell us a bit about that?
Yes, and continuing with what Oscar was saying about the new data economy and the need of interoperability for this data economy, I think what I'm going to say is quite obvious, but sometimes we forget the obvious, very obvious things. This is about business. This is not for the sake of interoperability or for any kind of naive idea of interoperability. This is for business. And business means that at the forefront of any kind of initiative like Gaia-X does, like Data is doing in the Iberian Peninsula, we have to think about business models. And business models is something that my background is completely technical, but I'm coming from previous experiences where we have developed, and I'm talking about experiences many years ago, what we call today data spaces that were really fueled by and promoted by a clear business case. The business case also needs to be anchored or needs to be in the context of regulation, because regulation is something that we need. Regulation can be bad, can be good for some, bad for some others, but regulation is going to be always there. And that's something that is actually different from industry to industry. So we need to take in account business models, we need to take in account the regulations of the different verticals, and then we need governance. We need a governance that has to be based on trust. But trust is something that also is built on very good technology. You need good technology, good ideas, so that trust can be enforced. So it's about business models, it's about regulation, and it's about building trust using the right technologies.
So the legal framework was mentioned earlier, and I believe there is an ever increasing awareness among the lawmakers and how technology impacts our lives. David, do you think that going forward, data will flow more depending on data sharing agreements and partnership, or will it be more depending on regulatory alignment?
Yeah, well, I think the business interest must come first for sure. And actually, we already have agreements and individual partnerships in place to share data and support business growth. But the challenge is to build common places that facilitate global partnerships among many different key players. And sometimes these players don't share the same interests, right? So on the other side, we are also used to seeing how regulators come behind or even far behind technology and business progress. Um, I would say in Europe we are lucky. We belong to the most advanced area in the planet in terms of regulation and respect to privacy and data sovereignty and all this stuff. But on the other side, there are so many layers, regulatory layers between the European level down to the countries, the regions, the cities. And this is kind of a huge bureaucratic stone that we have to deal with, right? So in general, I would say that the challenge here is to work faster with regulation to make sure businesses can develop in a trustworthy environment, regardless of where the headquarters are located. Right?
Good. I do see quite a bit of sharing of ideas between the three of you when it comes to business first, and it sounds like you're on the same page on that aspect, that you first go through the business partnerships and then kind of the legislation follows to some extent. And you mentioned the technical aspects of it, which of course are essential for data interoperability. Oscar, maybe coming back to you, what kind of data you see that is relevant to flow between ecosystems? Because there's definitely some data that should not exit ecosystems, but there's some that should. So I know you're representative for an ecosystem yourself. What would the kind of data that needs to be move between them, in your opinion?
I I think, and maybe here we can connect a little bit with one of the hackathon exercises that we implemented here in Bilbao. I think the issue of sustainability and greening elements of industry and society is something that will call for data to flow between sectors. When we talk about energy, when we talk about materials, when we talk about mobility, transport, logistics, this type of data will influence many different areas, from the management of mobility in territories to organizing how different supply chains can gain resilience. So I would say that these elements that connect with energy, with resources, with mobility and transport are great candidates for data that will flow across different sectors.
Okay, and if we look at the components that are necessary, like software components that are necessary to create interoperability, Giuseppa, maybe you can give us some insights on from your point of view.
Yeah, okay. I think my point of view is should be quite in line with the point of view of the Gaia-X community, hopefully, because we are all part of a community and we are kind of a moving target in terms of the prioritization of different components. But in my opinion, I would say, first of all, is identity. Identity is a must because without identity, it's impossible to have trust. You were talking about ensuring, not enforcing, but I think that at the back end of all our technologies we have lawyers, and lawyers are really then enforcing people here. So identity is the very first thing that has to be there and has to create the trust. And then we have a different set of services to implement, technical services like data exchange, of course, IDSA, the association with IDS technologies. I think it's giving a very good blueprint and start point for data exchange architectures for Gaia-X. Then we have everything about data models and meta models and data services models. So catalogs and so on. So we have a whole bunch of different technologies that are required for the discovery of data, for the publication of data, for the consumption of data. If we can't find the data, then there is not going to be any data market at all. Traceability and ledgers is another hot topic. Because without traceability and distributed ledgers, it's quite impossible to implement charging principles. Charging principles, we almost never talk about charging principles in Gaia-X, or at least not that I'm aware. But charging principles are, for me, the key element for the companies to understand how to monetize and how to make business out of the data. And if charging principles are clearly implemented on distributed ledger technologies or through traceability technologies, and we have a data exchange that implements these charging principles, then money starts to flow. And when money starts to flow, then we have data spaces that really make impact and provide this data economy that we are all looking forward.
I like your pragmatic view on it, and I think you're right. Just looking at how long like the time it took to get where we are, I don't think the monetization was, let's say, in the priority list, but it's starting to become, because some of the challenges have been already solved, and now it's time to move into that. So we discussed about the why and the what. Let's look a bit now on the how. David, how will users be able to access across all platforms and providers to use data and to share?
Yeah, we need a lot of work here. And this is one of the challenges about privacy, right? Because with social login, for instance, we ease users to register or access different services, but Google, Facebook, and all the major players, they are the data keepers, and we don't want that, right? So we have to design identity management technologies that will be able to use wallets with all user credentials within these wallets in a way that users don't need to bother about which credential they use while on the credential and the data that the service is requesting is shared by these wallets. Right? I mean, something like in the physical world, for instance, we need digital systems more secure and automated that are authorizing this access. For instance, with social networks, you probably need to authorize access only for people that are older than 80 years old. But with these wallets, if we do it in the right way, we are going to provide this access without saying the age exactly. So the access is going to be granted, but the service doesn't know the age. The service only knows that it's okay for this user to have access there. In the same way, for instance, browse webs, applications in our mobiles, streaming services, bank accounts, everything that we are already used to access, but with current systems, we have to create this identity and access management new systems that are going to evolve in an incredible way in the next few years until we get really a mass adoption and until we get users get used to a totally transparent way of using credentials. Right? I think this is the great challenge here.
Okay, I agree with you on that one, and I think this is an interesting way to look at it. Like you mentioned, you decouple a little bit on what is the technology that knows what, but at the end, the components trust each other or trust the information they share with each other that it's accurate. So let's say the server doesn't know the age of, like in your example, the age of the user, but there is a component down that pipeline that knows and ensures that the age is appropriate. So I think that's a pretty interesting,
Exactly.
pretty interesting use case. Before we close, I would like to touch a bit on the challenges and risks ahead. So, Giuseppe, do you see any risks or potential negative effects of sharing data between ecosystems?
In principle, I don't see any kind of, let's say, risk or apart from the fact that sharing data is sharing value. So you have to be very careful with who receives your value and what is used for. But apart of that, that is also an obvious thing. I would highlight one of the risks I see, and is hype. In technology, we're always moving on this hype cycle, very well described by Gartner. And let me give you an example. In the last weeks in Spain, mainly in Spain, we are taking part in some regulatory initiatives taking account the potential artificial intelligence sandbox or a regulatory sandbox that the government wants to create. Actually, it's a very good idea because the Artificial Intelligence Act is coming, so it would be very helpful to use a sandbox so that we can test and see if different approaches really make sense. And there is no artificial intelligence without data, so this is about sharing data, of course. But the idea of the sandbox that is good in principle also creates some ideas about what can be done and what shouldn't be done that are not realistic. Because a sandbox, a regulatory sandbox, is what it is. It's a place where you are going to play, you are going to do things that later on, maybe in the real life, you won't be able to do it. And you won't be able to do it because the law will stop you doing these kind of things. So what I would highlight is that we are now in a very exciting moment with the Artificial Intelligence Act is coming. There are many. I'm very positive on the act, I have to say. But the idea of anything that is beyond the act or anything that is, let's say, requires some flexibility, we will have a sandbox for that. And it's very nice to work on sandbox, but real money, real business, real impact is made on real data spaces. So we have to be careful with experimentation in a sandbox with something that in principle is very nice, but then later on in the real economy doesn't work. So that's the only risk I see today. That is in principle has a very good side using a sandbox for this kind of experimentation and so on, but we have to be very careful about the things that we will be able to do in a sandbox and won't really be even legal in a real context.
Okay. And Oscar, from your point of view, what are the biggest challenges that makes it difficult today to break the silo?
Well, I think we have to realize that to implement effectively all these data sharing and to develop these all these AI-based applications. Some developments need to occur concurrently, or at least somehow in a harmonized way. We need to see investment in large-scale infrastructures that can create this federated trust and this management of identity that Joseba was referring before. We need to make sure that the specific services that create trust at the software level and allows this interoperability for data exchange are based on software that we all can trust and that can operate across the computing continuum. But more importantly, we need to have access to data of sufficient quality. If we build the other part, but we forget that data sharing and this value sharing is about managing and dealing with an asset of value to the ecosystem, then we have to realize that all parties have to invest and they have to work to make all this new ecosystem really flourish. And when we talk about sharing data across ecosystem, the issue has an additional challenge. That is, the data that is actually prepared for this value in one sector has to also retain the value for the sector where the data is reused. So working on the semantics and making this reuse of the data of quality is probably the fourth biggest challenge. So without a clear business case, a strong investment in infrastructures, reliable software to make the exchange possible, and this semantic support for reuse of data that is fair in terms of data being findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. We are basically not yet reaching the scale that we are all trying to achieve.
Thank you for that view, Oscar. And David, maybe from the point of view of a cloud provider, what are the biggest challenges you see from where you sit?
Well, when we talk to our customers, they first need to understand the benefit of sharing data, and on the other side, they are more concerned about safety and security and privacy. Who is going to know what about their data, right? So creating this trust framework where every player can feel sure to invest and go for data sharing policies is I think, the key challenge. For instance, we as a cloud service provider, if we are going to share information from our data centers, the monitoring systems, for instance, we need to make sure that the others, and we of course can use this data, but without knowing whose data they are. If we are going, for instance, to access to statistics about a particular performance ratio or costs and all these things, temperatures, well, lots of things, we need to make sure that everybody access to these statistics without knowing exactly who is the data. And we have an example with hotels, for instance, in our Gaia-X group here in the Spanish hub, the tourism. Hotels, for instance, want to know the average room price for a particular place and date. And in order to share this information, we have to show them we are collecting data, real data from all the different hotels, but and we have to calculate the average price in a way that nobody's going to know whose price it for all rooms, right? So no traceability is possible, and so on, so that we have the real figures, but we have to use not only encryption but also other technologies like randomly adding and subtracting numbers and all of these things, that in the end, when you explain this to the hotels and all the users, they can feel safe and sure that, okay, I'm going to access the information that I can use, but nobody is going to use my data against this sharing, right? And this is really the key topic, I think, to enable this data sharing, data economy, and breaking the silos and the distrust that we may have.
Thank you for that. So, while there are still some challenges ahead, I think a lot of progress has been made so far. And at Gaia-X, interoperability continues to be one of our main focus. We prioritize making sure that the specifications are generally applicable and that the software we create is vendor neutral and can be used upon multiple stacks. That being said, I would like to give all three of you a big thanks for your insights and to our listeners for joining us today.